Thank you. How many needed Navassa for a new one? How many did it put at the top of the honor roll? Oh, a couple. How many still need Navassa for a new one? Well, maybe in a few years we'll get another chance. Well, this is almost the same talk as yesterday, except I changed the date in the title slide. So we'll get going. How many were said in yesterday's talk? A long, long time ago, when God created the world, he created a place called Navassa. And you know what that means, don't you? You can't go there. He also created a place called Desecheo, and you know what that means, don't you? Can't go there either. That's right. You guys are pretty sharp. Navassa and Desecheo are U.S. possessions in the Caribbean, and they're controlled by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and they're considered closed refuges. And the most wanted list, things are at the top of the most wanted list because you can't go there, either because they're physically remote, like Heard Island, Bouvet, politically remote, like Desecheo, Navassa, North Korea, some other places. They're expensive, financially remote, or the logistics are really complex, for even some of the easy, politically remote places, I would say. So there's a lot of complexities and things that put things on the most wanted list for a reason. And looking at Club Log, the last activity in Navassa was in 1993. And it was generally considered, like Chris just said, probably the most wanted realistic entity, at least in Europe and Asia. And a long, long, long time ago, getting permission when it was governed by the U.S. Coast Guard, you would ask for permission to go, and they would say, when do you want to go, and how can we help? After the Fish and Wildlife took over, when the Coast Guard abandoned the island, Fish and Wildlife Service says, no way can you go, because it's a closed refuge. How long did it take, after President Kennedy said we're going to go to the moon, how long did it take?
Probably 10 years.
8 years. How long did it take the KP15 project to get to Navassa? 13 years. So the conclusion is it's easier to get to the moon than it is Navassa. So let's look at why you can't go there, politically remote and physically remote. In 2002, after several attempts individually to get permission to go to Desecheo and Navassa, we formed the KP15 project, and with the goal to cooperate with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to get permission to go to these islands. And it took 7 years to get permission to go to Desecheo. And each of these papers represents an appeal or an application or something, in some major form to get permission to go to Desecheo. And after Desecheo happened, we had very good relationship with the Fish and Wildlife, and we thought within a year or two would be on Navassa. And there were retirements and transfers, and basically we had to start all over again. We had 2 congressional hearings, we had multiple use permits. In the last 2 or 3 years, 3 of us spent at least 25, 30 hours a week. It was almost a full-time job with paperwork, working with the Fish and Wildlife. In May, just before Dayton last year, May of 2014, we got this letter finally saying that one of our appeals was approved, and we could go. But there'd be some strict parameters that they would put forth, and they'd have to take basically bids or proposals from other interested groups that had applied in the past. And there won't be any more requests accepted for another 10 years. So since it was 22 years since the last DXpedition and 10 more for the next, this is like a generational DXpedition, once every 32 years. So if those of you who didn't get it, hope you're around in 10 years. So we'll try for it again. So we finally got the green light at the end of August last year, and by October 1st, proposals were due. For Desecheo, it took them about 2.5 months to make their decision for the groups that applied. This time, amazingly, it only took a couple of weeks, and we were notified that our proposal was the winning proposal. And they said, we have to go in January and February because that's the least bird nesting time. And do you want to go in January of 2015 or 2016? Well, with the sunspot cycles on the decline and with the way things change with Fish and Wildlife, there's no way we were going to go in 2016. We wanted to go sooner than later because we had the green light. So the strict rules were the permit was valid until the middle of February. We could go for 14 days. Couldn't interfere with the nesting birds, make no environmental impact. We couldn't take crossbows and other specific weapons. We couldn't do any gambling. I don't know what that has to say about sunspots, but that's always a gamble. We could take 15 people maximum. We had to take 5 fish and wildlife people along to make sure we complied with all their rules. We had to provide all their food and water and their infrastructure and their transportation from Gitmo. And we had to use a helicopter landing. And we had to have a standby ship for evacuation and other things. So that were some of the requirements that Fish and Wildlife said. And of course, you have to do this at no cost to the U.S. taxpayer. And by the way, it's going to cost $104,000 to do that. So it's due 30 days before you go. Amazing. So anyway, we got the politically remote checked off. Let's see about the physically remote. This is a view of Navassa. You can see looking down from space. There's a nice beach that goes all the way around, most of the way around the island. Well, not true. If you look at it horizontally, there's cliffs all the way around, and that's why there's no access. There's no beach or access. It's very unfriendly, and there's no beaches. There's very hazardous access, jagged cliffs, and the ground is very rugged. There's potholes that are hidden in the grass that you can drop into. It's very hot, and there's no natural water. There is a little cistern at the lightkeeper's house where some rainwater collects. There's poisonous plants and trees and spiders and rats and lions and tigers and all kinds of things. Nobody lives there, but the Haitian fishermen visit there mostly to get water from the cistern. It's a wildlife refuge, and you have to go in January and February, but the problem is that's when the roughest seas are. That's when winter storms from North America burn out in the Caribbean. And as it was, our boat was only able to stay on station about 40% of the time. So it's 2 square miles of petrified guano. Columbus visited on his 3rd and 4th visits and didn't find any water or resources there, so he moved on. And the Guano Islands Act of 1856 said that anybody who mines guano could claim that for the United States. And there was over 1 million pounds of phosphate shipped away from Navassa. It's claimed by 7 countries, U.S., Haiti, Jamaica, Cuba, Mexico, and some other South American, Caribbean countries. And U.S. control is generally accepted because of the economic and navigational and refuge management activities there. Back in the 1800s, with the guano mining, the conditions were very harsh. And to make a long story short, there was an uprising and several of the supervisors were killed, and the mining ceased just before the turn of the century. The Panama Canal opened in 1914, and because most of the shipping from the East Coast to the Panama Canal went through this area, the U.S. Coast Guard built a lighthouse, one of the highest lighthouses that was built 98 years ago. And it was automated in 1930, and the first ham operation from Navassa was in 1929 by the last lighthouse keeper. So that was the first ham activation. It was an observation post in World War II, and it was dismantled in 1996 after GPS and satellite navigation came into being. And then the Fish and Wildlife took over, and now it's a closed refuge. Here's a view of the lighthouse and the keeper's house. Looking to the west, we were allowed an operation around the lighthouse. We could use the path going down to Lulu Bay, which is where the ship was supposed to be most of the time. And several years ago, all the ham operations went up the famous ladder, about a 30-foot ladder from Lulu Bay up to this thing right here. And this is how it looks today. The ladder has been taken down. It's gone. And this is actually about the same area where the fishermen come ashore. We found a boat that could take us there with a helicopter, and would handle our crew and all of our equipment, about everything we wanted. What did that cost? It's only $650,000. So that turned out to be not an option. So how to get there safely? Number one, renting a boat like that wouldn't work. And as it turned out, with the weather, the boat probably wouldn't be able to stay on station anyway. Could we go from Haiti? It's too far, even though Navassa is 40 miles from Haiti. The closest airport where a helicopter could refuel was out of range, even with auxiliary tanks. And so and we tried to get permission from Guantanamo Bay, even at the highest levels of the Navy, but it was just impossible to get permission to stage out of there, even though that's where the Fish and Wildlife had to stage out of. And so the only option then was Jamaica, and we found a helicopter company in the Dominican Republic that had worked out of Jamaica before, and they thought they could service Navassa because it's only about 110 miles from this one little airport to Navassa, and with an auxiliary fuel tank, their big Huey could handle that fairly easily. And it would take about 2.5 hours round trip, and they had to carry about an extra 900 pounds or about 400 kilos of jet fuel. So that limited their cargo capacity about 700 kilograms for a round trip. And this little airport is based in the northeast corner of Jamaica in a little airport called Ian Fleming. Who knows about Ian Fleming? Most everybody does here, the inventor of James Bond. And, oh, by the way, it's $200,000 in advance. You know, that's what the helicopter is going to cost. We bought a package, and the helicopter had to stay on duty. That was one of the requirements from Fish and Wildlife. I mean, they had to stay on standby in case they were needed, just like the ship did. So there's where the helicopter landing would be on the island. And this is the vessel. George, AA7JV, and Tommy, HA7RY, they were on Chesterfield, you know, the two of them for about a month. What was that, about 3 or 4 years ago? Maybe 5 years ago. But anyway, George has this very nice vessel, and he owned it, and fortunately it didn't cost us anything. So that could have been a big price, but that saved a lot of money too. And they had to stand by, at least on paper, in Lulu Bay, but they were, like I said, only able to stay on station about 40% of the time. And their goal was to resupply some water, food, and fuel, and be an evacuation route. And George had figured out this nice catenary and davit system to offload equipment and to get things back on the ship. You'll see it and see it in some action. So there, we've solved our physical remote. We can get there, and let's look at the expensive side. You know, the expedition itself didn't cost too much, but when you put in the fee from Fish and Wildlife and the transportation costs, it added up. In fact, our total cost was something like $372,000 or something like that. And we have, in our income right now, we have just a little bit less than $5,000, and I think we're going to probably use that as seed money to go back to Desecheo here in a couple of years. That's the plan anyway. So we've basically broken even, and we got our funds in just at the very nick of time. I mean, just as those bills were due, we got things in. So we really appreciate all the clubs, CDXC and other European clubs, GMDX. A lot of them just really helped, and we had a lot of individual helps too, and we had corporate sponsors. Our team put up a little bit more than half of the funds, and you can see about 20% of our funding came from Europe, a big percent from Asia, and the rest was from North America. So we've solved our expensive part. We got one more step to go, and that's to solve the logistics. It's really a logistics nightmare. On Desecheo, we had 14,000 kilograms of gear. We transported a freezer and a refrigerator and almost a complete chef's kitchen, plus all kinds of generators and a lot of stuff because it was such a short distance from Puerto Rico. And we reduced that down to, we thought we could get by with 9,000 kilograms. Well, add 15 people, their baggage, 2.5 gallons of water a day, and fuel for the generators. If you do the math, you know, it really adds up. I'm not very good at that, and if you can only carry 700 kilograms at $10,000 round trip, it adds up pretty fast. So we had a problem. Minimal viable configuration is what we came up with. Because of the weight and volume, you know, if we wanted to take everything we wanted to take, the last of the supplies would still be flying in as we were ready to leave, you know. So what if the boat couldn't come? What if they couldn't stay on station? Or what if the davit system catenary line wouldn't work? You know, so we had to come up with this minimal viable configuration. What is the minimum amount needed to pull off a DXpedition like this? Radios and amplifiers, some cables, some generators, some extension cords, some fuel. Got to have some antennas, got to have some coax, got to have some water and food to drink. We took MREs so we wouldn't have to have any kitchen equipment. We'll talk about those in a little bit. We took some tarps and cots. Got to have some tables and chairs to operate from. Oh yeah, I got to have some operators too. And we figured out that we could get this in 7 to 8 helicopter trips out and maybe 5 back. And as it turned out, we made it out in 7 trips and back in 4. So you'll see what the logistics are. This is our radios, headsets, our water, equipment, antennas, coax, everything, tables and chairs, even toilet paper we took. And this is a 20-foot container. This is the first layer and the second layer, and this 20-foot container was about 20% filled. The rest of it was air. But that's what it takes to mount, that's our minimal viable configuration to do a DXpedition. The only thing that's not there are gasoline containers, which we purchased in Jamaica. So the goals would be to obey all the rules of fish and wildlife, to have effective pileup management, make at least 100,000 Qs. We thought if we could do that, it would be a success. And we wanted to maximize the number of all-time new ones in the log that would work Navassa. And we wanted to really focus on our windows to Asia and Europe. We were going to be on all bands, but maybe not all band modes, and be safe and healthy. And choosing a team, very important for something like this to be compatible, to have some hard workers who have done things like this before, have good pile-up skills, somebody that's trilingual, in 3 languages, have some special skills of antennas, power, IT, things like that. And of course, for a trip like this, you need a sense of humor. Here's our team. Average age, 64. We're not getting any younger anymore. So the final preparations, we had to have immunizations. We took malaria prophylaxis. Fish and Wildlife required us to have medical evacuation insurance, and we limited our personal belongings to 20 kilos. So we all came from the United States, except for Tommy. We met in Jamaica, and we took a 2-hour bus ride over to Ocho Rios, which is where the little airport is, and we stayed at the Moxon Beach Club. On a clear day, after the maids had been there and cleaned up the cockroaches and the mice and put new tablecloths on, it might have been a 1-star hotel. It was okay. It was certainly not what I would call a 5-star beach club, but it was a place to stay, and that's all we needed. And the pilots had stayed there before in their previous missions, and so it worked out. It really did. And without the help of the Jamaica Amateur Radio Club, we couldn't have done this, because they helped grease a lot of skids for our logistics and getting things in and out of the country. We had a planning session, and we did a lot of our work at the Ian Fleming Airport. This is a very modern airport in Jamaica. There's 43 people on staff, and they have 1 scheduled flight a week. These are the customs people who went through our things. We had to unload our container. They actually had 2 dogs that sniffed everything, and they went through everything we had. They didn't care how many vials of morphine I had or how many packs of sponges. It just had to exactly match the manifest. And we had MREs, and they went through every box and every MRE to make sure that there were none expired.
So what's an MRE?
Meals ready to eat. You'll see those in just a little bit. That was how we ate. So we did some careful planning. We weighed everything, put things in stacks, staged things in priority to go. The chairs represents the seat in the helicopter and how we would stack things in the helicopter. So that's how we pack things up. The helicopter arrived, and Bob says, "We got to take more than 600 kilograms a trip." And the pilot said, "No, look, we're right at the upper limit of our flight envelope as it is, so that's it." And we were plus or minus a couple pounds from the weight limit. We really weren't ever over. There's our water that we took. We took some gasoline. I arranged ahead of time to have those shipped into a hardware store, and when we went to the gasoline station, he couldn't figure out what we were doing. So we put everything back. We took everything, had taken everything out of this 20-foot container, and customs reloaded it for us into the 40-foot container in reverse order. So the first things out were in the front, and the last low priority things were in the back. So we've solved all these things, all the things it takes to pull off a DXpedition like this. The helicopter arrived. We were ready. The game plan was Fish and Wildlife would leave Guantanamo Bay before dawn one morning. They'd get there in about an hour. They'd check things out, give us a call, and say, come on over. And then the plan was then to have a lot of helicopter trips back and forth. And the ship would come from Miami. Actually, it was already in the area, be there with 3 operators, and we would proceed. Well, that morning came, we were up at 5 o'clock, we were out at the airport before dawn, and silence, nothing. We tried calling their satellite phone over and over, and by 10 o'clock, we were getting worried. By noon, we were really worried. By 2 o'clock, our pilot said that's the last time we can go for a flight, for a round trip before it gets dark. And since we had all their food and water and their shelters, we thought, well, maybe they've had trouble. We need to go at least on a humanitarian trip, at least to drop off food and water. They might not let us stay, but at least we can give them their supplies that they need to survive. And we were just getting into the helicopter to leave, and the sat phone rang and said, come on over as fast as you can. What was the delay? Oh, there was a congressional delegation in Gitmo, and they closed the airport and shut off all cell phone service and stuff. So thanks to our government, who's there ready to help us all the time, Anyway, we finally got the green light. We took off, and this is our first view of, I don't have sound hooked up, do I? But that's okay. Is there a sound cord? Okay. So you can see the lighthouse coming into view there. We landed at the lighthouse. We put up the flag. This is, you'll miss some commentary from here, but this is from WB9Z's, maybe I can turn up a little bit of volume here.
Congratulations, Glenn.
Jerry, good to be with you.
Good to be with you.
The good news was we could use the lighthouse.
I'm looking at Europe right now here. That's our shot to Europe. Glenn, do you want to describe what we're seeing here?
This is Lulu Bay. It looks straight down. The structure, catenary structure over here that used to have the ladder. They climb up this 40 feet ladder.
Okay, looks like we got a team here to do some work. This is all engineered by AA7 Juliet Victor. And our goal is to move all of this gas generators equipment and get it out into the area where we can haul it off with the helicopter. Okay, we got Craig going into the shower here. What a beautiful day.
Here's the cistern where the rainwater collects.
Okay.
In the center of the keeper's house.
W2GD out there moving an antenna, rotating a Yagi around. There's K6MM supervising. There's the lighthouse. American flag at the top. Here's a bunch of the wire antennas. There's a 6-meter antenna. There's Ralph K0 IR. Here's the Navassa Power and Light. Some more of the stepper 2-element Yagis. Dipoles all over the place. They all worked extremely well.
And that's making the last cue. This is a picture of our helicopter taken from an incoming Fish and Wildlife helicopter. So that's, it looks like it was a big spot on the pictures before, but the helicopter fills up that pad pretty well. We were able to use the lighthouse, even though there was a lot of, it was very rusty, very dirty inside. You can see how deep some of the rust is. Some of the railings were missing, but it was actually pretty safe. It was very dirty in there, and the first day we shoveled out several inches of stuff, very hot, very dusty, and I never felt like I needed a shower more than that day. And of course, the only thing we had was salt water to wash off with, so it seemed like I felt dirty from day one until we got home. In the lighthouse lobby, we set up 3 stations. It was perfect for that. You could almost eat off the floor. In the keeper's house, it was kind of dirty to start with, but we got things cleaned up pretty good for our tents and cots. This is our original antenna plan, to have all these antennas and things, but if you're a ham on a DXpedition and you have this 160-plus foot tower, you're not going to let it just sit there, are you? We figured that if Amazon could deliver with drones, we could do the same thing by carrying at least a line up to get started, to pull our antennas up. And we also brought one of these bazooka shooters to throw some lines over if we needed to. But as it turned out, we were able to use the lighthouse. We had antennas up very high out of every window. And I can almost say, we had low-band antennas better than 99% of our audience. This is a diagram of them. That 160-meter sloper goes right to Europe. You'll see how that works here in just a little bit. We had 2 steppers on one side, two steppers on the other side, and we basically had this little shelter where we ate, the CW and the sideband tents, and this is what it looked like inside. Worked out very, very well. And this is the 160-meter. There are 2 SGC 500s in parallel, powered from some batteries, and then a big battery charger from the generator kept the batteries up. So this kind of modulated the amperage so things didn't swing too much. Every antenna came to the back of this patch panel, and if you were assigned to a certain station, you'd pick the coax from that station and plug it into the antenna, adjust the stepper control, pick up your bandpass filter, and go to that station and work for a 3-hour shift. We had a lot of atmospheric noise for the low bands, and the beverages really brought it down to almost nothing. They were very, very impressive. Couldn't have done the low band work without those. So basically, this was our eating shelter where we operate CW and sideband. But where do we sleep? Our original plan was to put up these tents and tarps, but their ground was very rough and ragged. And fortunately, we were able to use the shelter, and we put up our tarps and cots in this after we cleaned it up. So that worked out pretty well. So we called this the Navassa Hilton, the front door, the back door. There's a lot of graffiti on the walls, but it certainly wasn't Kent's Hill. There's Suite 1. This is Sleep 2. Must have been a hard night. This is the light and power company where we had our generators. These 2,000-watt, Honda 2,000-watt generators worked very, very well. And we made a lot of DXers happy, getting all-time new ones in the log. We were well on our way to 140,000 Qs and made a lot of friends in the process, I think. We worked until we dropped. We made a couple hundred Qs on 6 meters. Didn't work any Europeans, and very few North Americans, actually. We made a few satellite Qs. That was a lot of fun. These are the 160-meter contacts to North America. As every night goes by, you can see We made quite a few. And by this time, I think we're working everybody. The numbers are getting a little bit less. Maybe it's conditions.
It's interesting they had a big surge during the day at one point.
So this is Europe, 160. First night, you can see North America over here on the side too, but not too many got in that night or the next night. Pretty spotty. Ooh, guess who the operator was that night? I'll introduce you to him here in just a second. So you can see there were some really good nights and some nights that weren't quite so good. Or maybe we've worked everybody. So who was that operator? He never fell asleep. Helicopter from the lighthouse, kind of a different view. Looking down the helicopter, you can see our beverage coax line running this way over to the shacks. Just a little different perspective of a helicopter from above. And George, A7JV, quite a fearless guy. He's 70 years old, probably more fit than any 20-year-old that I know, very muscular. He put this ladder up. This is how the fishermen get on and off the island with this rope here. And he put up this ladder, and you can see after even a day or two, the rungs are broken. But this is how George first got on the island to help set up the davit and catenary line system. One time, the front of the boat got caught under here with the waves, and the rear end of the boat went almost vertical, and that was pretty scary. So anyway, that's how George got on the island to help set up that catenary and davit system. And he was pretty good at rock climbing with his bare hands and feet. This was the original sketch. And you can see it turned out to be a little bit different than the original sketch, but it certainly did work. And these are some extra supplies of gasoline and water that we unloaded from the Electra. And this little video runs a few minutes, and this gives you a pretty good three-dimensional view of Navassa. This is from the Lulu Bay. There's a very steep ramp here, and then there's actually a fairly good incline on this sidewalk up to the first gas house. The lighthouse was powered with acetylene, and there were some very big acetylene tanks in the gas house. And there was a pipe that went up to near the lighthouse, and that was where we did the sideband operation. But this little shack right here is about the same size, is exactly identical to the one up at the top. And this is where a lot of previous DXpeditions operate out of, right next to Lulu Bay. There's the little concrete gutter that the pipe laid in that went up to the lighthouse. It's probably about a half a mile from Lulu Bay up to the lighthouse. And the first part here is fairly level, but in just a moment we're going to go up this steep incline. Again, it's very hot, and if you're carrying 50, 60 pounds of water and gasoline, you break out into a pretty good sweat on the way up. So you get up here to the crest, and it's still a quarter mile over to the lighthouse. If you look at the flag at the lighthouse and then see how stable the camera is, it's an amazing gyroscope that keeps the camera level. That's our view to Europe right there. We put up that tarp to collect rainwater for bathing, but after we put that up, it never got any rain. So if you ever had any antenna trouble, get one of these little helicopters to check out your antenna. So he was a pretty good pilot. There's what it looked like. He was the first mate on the Electra. The landscape was very rugged. A lot of the broadleaf leaves that you see are poison wood. The cliffs are very tall. There's rats and black widow spiders and cockroaches. There's some unique lizards that live there, a few crabs, some bats, the last pseudophoenix in the world. The red-footed boobies is what the Fish and Wildlife was concerned about, that we would interfere with their nesting. And so we named our Meg tent the Red-Footed Booby Inn. And this is what it looked like inside. There I am looking for my next MRE. What is an MRE? It stands for Meals Ready to Eat. It also means meals refusing to exit, or in some cases, meals ready to expel, or meals resembling edibles, but mostly they're morale-reducing elements. They really weren't that bad. It could have been worse. These are a couple of my favorite, this beef patty and shredded beef, water, and binder product and barbecue sauce, whatever that is. But it was good. A new thing in the Army is our tacos, taco fillings. There's several taco fillings, and they come in this blue foil, and it's very popular in the military. And we had some fresh fruit and some candy bars from Electra, and that was a real treat. Our kitchen was very simple. We had a little propane heater for heating water, a little ice maker, and a microwave oven. We had a high-tech comm board that told us where we were going to do things and what, and kind of kept track of our fuel usage and things. This is our ops schedule we had every day. Take this one guy, everybody had a minimum of 4 shifts a day, and these were the bands he would be assigned to, and he'd have some sleep or rest periods maybe in between. And a couple times we had some hot meals from the Electra when it was able to be there in Lulu Bay. Of course, you got to take care of business too, and sometimes it's kind of difficult. But anyway, that's how we took care of things. It was really hot. We went through a lot of water, got a few cactus burrs in us and some poison wood touched up. One day, the helicopter arrived and brought us breakfast, and what do you think it cost? Don't ask. It was with the last supply of fuel and water, so that was nice. We saw 2 water spouts while we were there, and it rained a lot after that. And then we decided to put up that tarp to catch rainwater, but then it didn't rain after that. This is a nice night view. I have to say something about the Haitian fishermen. They are very hard workers, and they would sail over from Haiti and fish around the island, and they would come up to the keeper's house for water from the cistern, and they'd come up usually a pair at a time. Sometimes we wouldn't see them for a couple, 3 days. Sometimes it'd be 2 or 3 pairs that would come up at once. But that's where they would get their fresh water, so they wouldn't have to bring it from Haiti. And when we were done, everyone suggested we give them what we had left over because it would just cost us to take it back, and it would probably just be salvage stuff, and we knew they could use it. So we gave them our extra fuel, cots, tables, chairs, shelters, ladders, things like that, and they were very receptive of that, and they probably had one of the best days of fishing they've had in a long time. And this is how the last 2 guys got off the island by the davit system, and Might have been a little scary, but unfortunately that last day was one of the calmer days, so you can see the seas are pretty flat. So that worked out pretty well. Then the Electra heads back to Miami. It's time to leave the last day. The helicopter is there, and I can't say enough about our fish and wildlife friends. They were very helpful, a lot of fun to work with. We worked with them on Desecheo, each one of them, so we knew them from before, and they've asked us to go back with them to Navassa sometime here, hopefully soon. And it was really a lot of fun to work with them. And we had a search to make sure we didn't take any souvenirs off the island with us, and a couple of us have some nice passport stamps of Desecheo and Navassa. And this is what it looked like traveling in the helicopter. And when we got back that last day, flying over the Moxon Beach Club, it was a 5-star hotel. Now, I was in the shower for 45 minutes. My fingers were wrinkled. It was good to be back, and we were really, really tired. How'd we do? We made 140,000 Qs. We said we'd be happy if we could make 100,000, and we did very well, I think. Almost 25% of our Qs were on 20 meters. We had a dedicated station on 20 meters all the time. We made quite a few Qs on 160. We set a record number of Qs on 75 phone and 12 CW. And 25% of our Qs were all-time new ones, or at least unique calls. And one of our best openings to Asia was the last 24 hours. 32% of our Qs were with Europe, and 6% with Asia, which was actually quite a bit of increase from Desecheo. So overall, again, it was a good third of our log was Europe, and not quite 60% was America. We had good, strong openings to Europe, but the rates were just a little bit slower. Can't blame you guys. It was a different part of Europe, but anyway, that's the way things are. So anyway, things are on the most wanted list because you can't go there. They're expensive, complex logistics, but sometimes you can go to places like this. And the next time you see a moon, full moon, just remember it's easier to go to the moon than it is Navassa. So here we are for our group picture. Thank you very much. Thanks for letting me be here, and I hope you all got your QSL card. Any questions? Yes?
What did you use? I see the sticker I asked. What did you use in the way of masts to put those on?
M Squared built some masts for us. They were 20 feet, and they went together pretty well. We probably could have gone up a little bit higher if we had another little section or two, and if they were a little bit stronger, it would have been nice to have them a little bit higher, but with the winds we had there, that probably worked out pretty well. The dipoles were very high. The 40-meter dipole was at 110 feet, and it was our killer antenna on 15 meters because it was kind of a V-beam toward Europe. It was really a good antenna. So we had really good dipoles, too. I think in my honest opinion, the dipoles up high work better than the Yagis down low. Any other questions? Well, thank you very much for being here, and thanks for working us if you were in our log. And if you have any questions, I'll be glad to entertain them by myself. So.